Alrighty, we are apparently live.
I will continue admitting people, but let me just go ahead and mute everybody. And then Alan, just remember to unmute yourself.
All right, let's do this. Welcome everybody. Online London Excel meetup for October here. You can see we've got David waiting in the wings to take us through the presentation today on Excel Quirks and Nuances. So I'll hand over to him really shortly. Just going to go for the usual kind of welcome to everybody, especially for those who are at this meetup or at these events for the first time. So you know the general plan of how we do things here, and to let everyone know about upcoming events, which is what you should be seeing on my screen at the moment. So we have in-person events as well for those of you new. So we do try and do one in person and one online each month to get the benefits of kind of both worlds, I guess, and to incorporate everybody. So next event is coming real soon, a couple of weeks' time. We'll have Mark Proctor, who's a regular here, and so many of you probably know of him. He runs the blog Excel Off the Grid, stuff like that. And for those who can make it, we'll be meeting at the Microsoft Reactor in London, just around the corner from Liverpool Street Station. And he'll be taking us through designing refreshable processes, you know, one click from data to done, taking advantage of, I don't know exactly what he's covering. I mentioned stuff the other day and he said, oh, no, I'm not doing that. But a few things, whether it be Excel, Power Automate, Office scripts, tables, is going to use some of the features available to automate a process. So that will be cool to see what he does. And that is very much his game. In automating the creation of reports and anything else Excel and Power BI related. November, you know, a few weeks gap there. We are back online with Melina to take us through some secrets and tips around autofilter and probably some other stuff, I guess. Keeping online, we've got Alex Powers from Microsoft coming over the wires, doing some Excel and Power Query online stuff. So I know he's pretty excited about that from emails and showing some of the new things that, you know, can be done nowadays as Excel and the cloud and Power BI and all these related products grow and grow at a pace that, I don't know about you guys, but I just can't keep up with the thing. Every time I look at something, they move it and change it. And then we're back in person to round out the year with Charles Williams, who hopefully many of you know if you're from the Excel world, because that man is quite literally a legend, especially in the game of writing formulas and the add-ins he's produced and what he's done for everyone, really, from Microsoft to Excel to us. He'll be there in person for those who can make it. New venue for those who go to London stuff. Red Kite will be using their venue for the first time, and probably quite a few more times next year, as they may be a kind of regular venue for us to borrow. And he'll be taking us through how to develop a VBA add-in. So a great opportunity to meet people, you know, and in the real deal, get some photos, learn some stuff, share some tips, probably have a beer after. Another thing that's going on really, really soon, couple of weeks, can you believe? Over in Bulgaria, for those who can make it there, especially for those of us European based, it's quite an easy trip for us, harder for those further afield. All those faces, one of them being mine, the person to my left, if you're looking straight at it, is Charles Williams. And a few other people, many of you probably know. Tim Heng, who's the guy in the top right, in between Cristiano and Jordan, he's going to be in London on the 8th of November as well, if you want to meet him. As he'll be coming over from Australia, it will stop in London before we go to Bulgaria. But there is a conference on the 11th of November. All of us will be speaking there, as you can see from the photos there. Big event. Tickets are available. It's only a couple of weeks' time. I booked my airport parking this morning. If you can make it, come over. Great opportunity to network and learn and, you know, have a good time with a bunch of folk who like to talk about Excel and Power BI and related tools. Pop a link in the chat if you can, Taylor. I haven't got that prepared, unfortunately. Shame on me. But awesome event. Taylor will be there as well. All good. Things to know about this stuff. We are live at the moment on YouTube. We'll be live throughout the whole presentation, and I'll shut that down some point nearer towards the end. And some of us may chat a little bit more after. So that will be recorded there as well. Always a common question, like, will there be a replay? Yes, there will be. The link to that is in the meetup description. I think there's a bullet point for that. There it is.
And I've just added it to the chat as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara. So the same link that takes you to the live recording is the same link for the replay. So it's in the meetup description now. It'll also be shared afterwards in an email, but that email only goes to people who has RSVP'd to the London meetup group. We've got nearly 3,000 members now. I don't email everybody to bother them. I only email those who RSVP. So if you want it and you haven't, make sure you do that. Pop to the group and RSVP now for that. Anything else? My book's still selling. Go and buy my book. And that brings us on to David's book, which is really what brings us here today. I was pleased to be there. Try and get it on screen. David will probably show you as well. I was a technical editor on this book, so I got a nice sneak peek as I got an opportunity to see it before it came out. It's written by David, who's presenting here today. So he's going to present on, I guess, some of the quirks that are covered. I don't completely know what he's going to talk about, but maybe other stuff. But, you know, really good book. As I've been through it myself due to the fact that I looked through for kind of technical editing, and there's loads of tips in here that I think anybody can benefit from, really, whether you're starting out or whether you're an expert. You know, Excel's got so much and it changes so much. There's always things that you're either learning for the first time or maybe you know it, but you know, things get stale, don't they? And you forget things, and it keeps you sharp, learning about the different quirks and tips around. So that should be the cue to hand over to David. I'll stop my share so I can let him take it on from here, and we'll let him introduce himself and we'll go through some Excel stuff.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Hello, I'm David Ringstrom. I am a certified public accountant over in Atlanta. I think the rest of the world refers to us as chartered accountants. In any case, I have worked as a spreadsheet consultant since the early 90s. In fact, the first spreadsheet I saw was Lotus 123, and it was in the late 80s. And I remember sealing my fate one day. It was the first time I pulled up Lotus. It was the DOS version. And so at the time, I didn't know that you had to hit the slash key at the bottom to get to the menu. So pulled up the program, this grid you could just arrow around on, and I couldn't see anything else to do with it. And I remember saying, this is a stupid program. You can't do anything with it. And so I completely sealed my fate for spreadsheets, but it's been great. I have kind of a penchant for the weird stuff in Excel. And in my book that Alan gave me a great shout out for, I don't know if there's a bit of glare there, but in any case, one, I do have to say Alan immeasurably helped me improve this book with his feedback. So I'm very grateful to have had him as part of the project. If you ever get a chance to collaborate with Alan, I highly recommend him. And also, you know, his book's twice as big as mine, but again, if you just flip to any place in this book, you're going to learn something. So definitely pick up a copy of Alan's book. We are having a drawing at the end. If you hang out to the end, we're having a drawing at the end for 2 copies. I'm giving away 2 copies of my book. You can choose if you want the print copy or the ebook. So we'll cover that at the end. But let's jump into the material. Let me show you my screen. And I titled this presentation Excel Quirks and Nuances because I find that that's where most of the frustration arises in Excel, from this weird quirky stuff that arises, because a lot of the main features are easy enough to learn. But along the way today, I just want to point out some things that you may be aware of, may not, but definitely lots of quirky things there. So I did make handouts available. I think Alan posted them, or they'll be in the chat box, but there are handouts that will be available. And
We'll do
if
that
you
now.
miss the links, is there a background on the handouts, Alan?
Sorry, say again, mate.
The handouts, did you post a link, or you're going to do that afterwards?
I forgot I'm doing it now.
Okay. So that'll show up in the chat box, or where will that show up?
Chat box, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Great. All right, so Alan's going to post a link to the handouts. It will be, I only have an hour to cover a lot of material. So if you're trying to follow along with me, that's probably not the best idea. We are recording it, so you can play back the recording and pause it and kind of play along with the handouts. Then that's really the better approach there. But you can also always email me, ask@davidringstrom.com, if you miss out on the handouts or have any questions about Excel afterwards. Well, let's jump right in. And I always like to lead off a lot of my presentations with the disaster recovery technique. And this technique applies to us that are still saving our files locally. If you're saving files to SharePoint or OneDrive, this isn't as relevant, because then you have automatic versioning for those versions. But we don't all have control over where we get to save our files. And as you're likely aware, if we go to the File menu, if you go to Open, at the bottom of the Recent menu, there's a choice to recover unsaved workbooks. I'm going to show you a tweak in a moment where you can improve the odds of files showing up in that place. The other thing that's easy to overlook is that when you do go to the File menu and go to Info, that in that Manage Workbook section, up to the last 5 versions, 5 backups that Excel has made, will show up there as well. So in the Recover Unsaved Workbooks folder, the last backup gets saved there, but while you're actively working on a document, you'll see up to 5 versions there, and you can open up alongside the live file. So to improve the odds of files landing in that place, what you'll want to do, this is a one-time change, go to the File menu, go to Options, and in the Save section, it says Save Auto Recover Information. On your computer, it's likely going to say every 10 minutes. Now, here's the quirk there. In my experience, you actually take whatever that number is and multiply it by about 2.5. So if you leave that set every 10 minutes, then Excel might create a backup every 20 or 25 minutes. I don't know about you, but I can get a lot done in Excel in 20, 25 minutes, enough that it's painful to have to redo it if something happens, if the file crashes or I close the wrong file or any number of things. I found if I change that to every 2 minutes, then Excel starts creating a backup every 4 or 5 minutes. And that's a pretty good window. I sometimes get asked, well, why not change it to every 1 minute? If I did change it to every 1 minute and Excel is creating a backup for, every 2 minutes, let's say, well, then that's only a 10-minute window of being able to go back in time. Setting it to every 2 minutes, it gives me a bigger window, like a 20 or 30-minute window. And if I'm going to have to retrace my steps, I'm typically going to figure it out within that window. But 10 minutes, that's a little short. So that's why I like to tweak that particular setting there. While we're in there, I also like to change the number of recent workbooks to 50, particularly because in Microsoft 365, which I'm going to pull up, we can search, because it used to perhaps feel overwhelming to see the last 50 files that you worked on. Well, now we can just search that list, and that setting defaults to 25 files. So by changing it to 50, you can then have more immediate access to up to the last 50 files that you've worked on. So both of those settings, if I went to File and then went to Options, if I go to the Save section, I think on one of the webinars, I might change it every 1 minute. I typically keep that set to every 2 minutes. So on your computer, most likely set to every 10 minutes, ratchet that down to every 2 minutes, and you'll greatly improve the odds of Excel creating these backups for you that you can recover from. If we go down to the Advanced section and we scroll down a little bit, number of recent workbooks, it defaults to 25, ratchet that up to 50. It's 50 is as far as it goes. But in doing so, if we go to the File menu, we can then search the last 50 files that we worked on. And if I type in the word fruit, then it looks like I didn't open the fruit file here. But if I did student, then it just gives me a list of files that have the word student in their name that I opened recently. So much faster way to get to files that you've worked on recently.
I don't believe we're seeing the correct screen. Or what you just showed. Or were you just talking through it?
I think that's shared the PowerPoint, not the Zoom gets me every time. All right, so you see
Yeah,
me.
you can see Excel now, mate.
Okay, all right, quick run through then, file menu, options in that save section. This is where typically it's set to every 10 minutes. And that's what I recommend you ratchet that down to every 2 minutes. You can kind of play with that setting to see what works best for you. Further down while you're there in the advanced section, looking down at the number of recent workbooks, that setting defaults to 25. And that's the setting that I recommend that, I mean, why not be able to access the last 50 files that we worked on, just making it that much easier, particularly if you are in an environment where you're saving files in multiple subfolders, you can spend less time navigating that tree there. So another quirky feature is the sparklines feature, because when we use the sparklines feature, it depends, you have to do things in a specific order if you want to have your data on one worksheet and the sparklines on a different worksheet. If you're not familiar with sparklines, they are little tiny charts that you can place inside worksheet cells. And so to begin, you can select the cells where you want to put the sparklines, go to the insert menu, choose a type, so line, column, or win-loss. Select the cells that you want where the data is, click OK. That will then place the sparklines there. Now, if you do this in the opposite order, sometimes we start out selecting the data we want. The location range field is bound inexplicably to the worksheet that you're on. The data range can be anywhere in the workbook. And so that's where you can hit an unexpected stumbling block when you're working with the sparklines feature in Excel. So for instance here, just to do a quick background on the feature itself, if I select, let's say, these cells here, in fact, let's zoom in a little bit, on the insert tab, if I go to, let's say, line, then the data range can be anywhere that I want it to be. Now, why did it not create my sparklines? Going back to line, picking that data range, clicking OK. Well, talk about quirky. I haven't had Excel do that before where they didn't even show up. Let's just get to the actual quirk itself. So let's say that I wanted to have a sparkline here. And so actually, I'm going to do it this way. I want the sparkline on the other tab. So I'm going to start by selecting these cells. Go to the insert menu, click on line. So for the location range, trying to click on this other tab, it won't let me. So that's the main quirk I'm trying to point out, is that when you're using sparklines, the data range can be anywhere in the workbook. The location range can only be on the worksheet that you're on. Weird quirk, not sure why they have that limitation, but that's a definite stumbling block that you can run into with sparklines. As long as you pick the sparkline location first, then the data range you can navigate anywhere in the workbook, and then here it actually created my sparkline this time. So from there, I want to talk about the subtotal feature. The subtotal feature allows us to insert subtotals within a list. And folks that don't know about the subtotal feature spend a lot of time just brute force inserting totals within that list there. The quirk that we're going to see, though, is that when we go to format those totals, it uses the group feature, and the group feature does not protect the hidden rows. Now, the way that I have long worked around this was to select the visible cells, but recently I stumbled across an even better way to be able to format just the total rows when I want to get there. So the subtotal feature, if we want to insert totals within a list, first thing we want to do is make sure we sort our data so we don't end up with meaningless subtotals. Otherwise, the subtotals wouldn't really be relevant. From there, on the data tab of the ribbon, we click the subtotal command. Can choose how we want those subtotals to work. So at each change in vendor, let's say, can pick the field or fields that we wish to subtotal, and then click OK. Excel will subtotal list and also outline it, which adds some nice interactivity to our spreadsheet. So I have a list here. It's already grouped by vendor. So I will go to the data menu. In the far right, in the subtotal in the outline group, that's where we find subtotal. So when we click on that command, it defaults to the first field, which is region, but I want to subtotal it based upon vendor. So we'll do vendor, and it also defaults to totaling the last column. Well, I also want to total cases sold, so I'll then click OK. And we see that Excel has inserted totals after each item there. Also, it outlined the data. So when I click, let's say number 2, now I see just the totals there. So the trap that we can run into is when we go and want to format this, because you think just because you're only seeing certain rows that when you, let's say, make these cells bold, and maybe I'll just change the color just to add some contrast. When we go back and then we expand it, we see that Excel, as I like to say, did what we told it to rather than what we intended for it to do. I intended for Excel to only format the totals, but unfortunately, that's not what I actually asked Excel to do because of how the outlining feature works. So the outline feature does not protect the hidden rows. So I'm going to undo those changes, and 2 different approaches that you could take. The approach that I've long taken is to select those total rows. Then on the home menu, go to Find and Select, choose Go to Special, and then double click on Visible Cells Only. So one of my favorite nuances of Excel is in Excel for Windows. It does not work on the Mac, but in Excel for Windows, you can double click on choices inside dialog boxes and skip whatever the next button is. Now, if you're into keyboard shortcuts, Alt semicolon would select the visible cells instead of going through the dialog box. So once you have selected just the visible cells, then only those cells would be formatted. So what that would look like here is I could select these cells and then do Alt semicolon. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We can kind of see there's a little gap in between each row now that wasn't there before. That means that only the visible cells would be formatted there. So if I add a color, if I expand that, then we see that only the visible cells were formatted. But here is what I stumbled on recently. On the data menu, any of these commands in the outline group do not protect the hidden cells. On the same menu, though, the filter command does. And so if I turn on the filter feature, in fact, let me get rid of my shading here. So now I'm going to just click in the list, turn on the filter feature. The filter feature does protect the hidden rows. So I'm going to then select these cells. And if I expand that, okay, that didn't work because what I needed to also do, the other layer that I need to do, when I turn on so in fact, I need to expand the entire group. I only recently discovered it, so I don't quite have my explanations tight yet. But what we're going to see, if I go to the vendor column and search for the word total, so that I just, instead of using the button, the number 2 button to show the totals, if I filter for the totals, I'm going to temporarily not see any totals because I'm using filter, but I can come along, add my formatting, and when I expand it back, or basically unfilter it, only the total rows were affected. So rather than having to select the visible cells, when you're using the subtotal feature, if you layer on the filtering feature and then filter for the word total, and let's say you have the word total in the actual line there, then you can get more specific. You could say ends with the word total, so that you're more likely to have just the total rows there, apply that formatting, and then you don't have to bother with just the visible cells. With regard to filtering, one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts when I'm doing anything that involves a lot of filtering is to unearth the auto filter command. And so that's a command that I put on the quick access toolbar. Now, speaking of quirks, Microsoft is been working on what they're calling a visual refresh for Microsoft 365. And I've got Microsoft 365 on two different computers. This computer that I am speaking from does not have the visual refresh. That's because the undo and redo commands are not down on the home tab. When the undo and redo commands move down to the home tab, that's when you'll know that you have that new visual refresh. And at that point, and they might change their mind about it, but they have been hiding the quick access toolbar, meaning that you won't even see it on the screen. So if that happens and you want to restore your quick access toolbar, if you right click on the file tab, you can say show quick access toolbar to get it back once you have the visual refresh. But if we then click on the arrow for the quick access toolbar, we choose more commands. That puts us in the Excel options dialog box in the quick access toolbar section. And I've got a few commands I'm going to show you over the course of the presentation, but kind of the treasure chest in Excel is the commands not in the ribbon section. And I actually put a whole chapter on the quick access toolbar in my book because I just feel like there's so many great things in there, but auto filter is definitely one of my favorites. So we don't have to scroll to find it. We click auto filter, we click add, and we click OK. What that enables me to do is to click on any cell and then either click the icon or use the associated keyboard shortcut and filter the list with either one click or with a keyboard shortcut. So what that looks like, go back to my fruit list here that I had. Oh, in fact, before I move on from the subtotal, one other quirk that I even more recently discovered. Notice that presently I can undo 31 actions. Now, let's say that I change my mind by using the subtotal feature and I want to take those totals away. So I go to the data command, I go to subtotal, I click remove all, very pedestrian. What happens though, is that when you undo the subtotal command, it wipes out your ability to undo anything. So previously I knew that if you deleted a sheet, for instance, so events that disable undo, I knew that deleting sheets would do that and running macros. So the third item is removing subtotals. And if you use the subtotal feature, everything's good until you remove the subtotals. Removing subtotals cannot be undone, nor can any action that you carried out before you undid the subtotals. So that can be kind of a nasty trick that we learned the hard way. So for the autofilter command, to add that to our quick access toolbar, what I will do here is click the arrow at the end of the quick access toolbar, and I'll choose more commands. That's simply an alternative to going to the file menu and choosing options and then picking quick access toolbar. So second command down, commands not in the ribbon here. Here's where we'll find auto filter. And if I double click on it, lets me skip the add button. If I click OK, puts auto filter on my list. So now if I click on apples, I tap the Alt key, its shortcut key is 5. I just filter for apples. I can now go over to Atlanta, do Alt 5. So I can use this for one command per column, but if I need 2 or more items, I have to then use the drop-down menus, which I can display the drop-down menus by doing Alt and the down arrow. So Alt down arrow will let me get to there, and then I can arrow in here, press the Enter key. So you can completely filter just with keyboard shortcuts if you choose. When I do add auto filter to the quick access toolbar, and I tend to rotate commands in and out because the work I'm always doing always is shifting, but I also go to the data menu and I right click on the clear command and add that to the quick access toolbar as well. So that if I filter, let's say for, in fact, let me just show you, if I tried filtering for apples and oranges together and clicked on my auto filter icon, wouldn't do anything. So it refuses to work if I select 2 items. If I pick 1 item per column, then it will happily filter for me without me having to use the drop-down menu. The clear all command then restores the list back, but keeps those filter buttons in place. So we saw that to add that clear command on the data menu, right click, add the quick access toolbar, and anything in the ribbon you can add to the quick access toolbar. Where we get a little bit hung up, for instance, it would be nice to be able to say, if I'm doing a lot of yellow highlighting, add just a yellow highlight to the quick access toolbar. I can't do that. I can add the gallery and it will remember the last color I used, but I can't add an individual color. When folks ask me that question, my recommendation is that they use the macro recorder in Excel to record a macro that would assign the color. And then you can add an icon to the quick access toolbar for the macro. So next I want to talk about the table feature. The table feature also warranted an entire chapter of the book. And I periodically teach 2-hour webinars where I talk about all the different things that can be automated with the table feature. To make a list into a table, we select any cell. We can press Control-T and press Enter. Otherwise, we would go to the Insert menu, click the table command, and then click OK. Now you'll notice that in the Create Table dialog box, it has what I like to term an unwritten rule about Excel. It asks, does my table have headers? And that is a rule that I find many folks unwittingly violate. Because 1, they might not have any headers because they just know what the data is. Or many times they go the other way where they might have 2 rows of headings. So they might say cases and then sold. And they might say total and then sales. And doing that maybe because they're trying to narrow up the columns, something like that. You can get away with having 2 rows of headings here. So for instance, if I want to sort, then if I sort, notice that Excel says, okay, well, you got 2 rows of headings, that's fine. Now, what if I add a 3rd heading? So what if I said, year to date? Once I go beyond 2 levels, when I go to sort, well, in this case, Excel is still cooperating, probably because I just did that sort. I'm going to copy and paste this to a new worksheet. And then we're going to try this. So if I go to the data menu and I choose sort, now notice that by sorting around enough, all of a sudden it took my headings and then sorted them into the body of the list. And that's the trap that you run into. So what Excel really wants, and that question that the Create Table dialog box asks us is, do we have headers? What Excel means by headers is a single row of headings. And so if you can just discipline yourself to not try to be clever and use 2 or more rows of headings. Now, and it's not that you can't take things across 2 or more rows. You can click and do Alt-Enter and make it wrap in that fashion. So Alt-Enter is perfectly acceptable. Or also, of course, the wrap text command. That works as well if we use that to change the height. As long as the data is in a single cell, it counts as a valid header there. So let's take this list and make it into a table. We'll go to the Insert menu. We'll click notice it says my table has headers. And that's what we mean by headers. So having that single row of titles there. We click OK. Excel then shades every other row, which can be off-putting for some folks. Ways to remove that shading can either click None at the top or Clear at the bottom. You can set a default style for a given workbook that you do have to set that style for each workbook though. You can't set, if we go down and say set as default, that would only apply to new tables that we create in this workbook, and it would not apply to any other workbooks we create. We have to set that up over and over again. So hopefully at some point they'll do what they did with the pivot table feature, where if we go to the file menu and we go to options, and in this data section, we can finally set default formats and layouts for pivot tables. My hope is eventually we can set some default layouts for tables as well, but perhaps someday. So things that we can do with the table feature is we can turn on the total row, and the total row automatically tallies the last column. You can go to any other column there and choose from the drop-down list to add totals, or you can also grab the formula, the existing formula, and then drag it across. So I'll just drag it across. That gives me my sums there. Can also come across over here and then count. Now, a moment ago, I showed you the auto filter command, and auto filter only works with normal ranges of cells. If I'm in a table and I click on auto filter, then all of a sudden the behavior changes. All it does is it turns the filter buttons on or off. And so I can't use auto filter inside a table. I can use auto filter outside a table. And so the quirk is that within a table, auto filter becomes just an on-off button for filtering, as opposed to actually filtering based on the cells. We can always right click and choose filter and then filter by selected cells value. And so that's my secondary approach when I need that, if I want to filter just those values. Notice that the table feature automatically totals just the visible cells. And of course, we can also insert slicers with tables. And I'm going to unfilter my list here. Here's a quirky thing with regard to using slicers with tables. So right now, my cursor is at the bottom of my list. I'm going to go insert slicer. I'm going to choose city and product, and I'm going to click OK. So here are my slicers. And so I'll move them off the table. I'm going to click on Atlanta. And notice all of a sudden, I lose sight of my slicers. That's because they end up down, they can end up down where the data was. So my recommendation, if you are using slicers with tables, is rather than immediately adding them to just wherever you happen to be, add the slicers near the top of the table. So if you click anywhere near the top of the table, choose Insert Slicer, click, let's say, City and Product. Now, when they're near the top, when I make choices, I don't end up losing my slicers somewhere in the body of the worksheet. With slicers, you can click and drag down and make multiple selections by clicking and dragging. You can hold down the Control key and pick choices there. So that's where the table feature makes filtering even easier, because the other thing I like about slicers, not only do I get to see what I'm visually seeing in my list, I'm also always cognizant of what I'm not seeing. It's easy to lose sight of what you're not seeing within the drop-down menus there. A couple other things about the table feature. We talked about the total row, so we've covered that. But I'm going to add a per case price formula over here. And so here is my per case price. So two different things can happen depending on how I write the formula. If I type F2 divided by E2 and I press enter, interesting, that's something I didn't know. It should have filled the entire column, and apparently it didn't, because I had the data filtered. I've not run into that before. So let me clear this filter, and we'll come up here, F2 divided by E2, press enter. That's what should happen, is it should fill the entire table there. And what I want to point out is the formula that results here. So the formula in this cell is F2 divided by E2. Now, what many of us do is when we write a formula, we do per case price. We navigate to the cell, and nothing wrong with that, but we navigate over to F2. Notice that when you navigate, Excel uses the column heading. And if I come over here to cases sold, so then I end up with a different looking formula. It's a better documented formula. So it's basically saying sales divided by cases sold, as opposed to F2 by E2. The @ sign inside the field name tells Excel that we want to reference the data on the current row. If you took the @ sign out, Excel would perceive that as you want to reference the entire column at once. So that's why there's an @ sign embedded when we reference table field names there. But one other thing I want to point out about the table feature, let's say that I wanted to use this as a template. And so I have data I want to put in for a new month. So I'm going to delete all the data here. If I came in, if I pasted or just entered some data, so we'll just say North and we'll say Atlanta. Notice how my formulas came back. So even though I had deleted all the data, when you add formula columns to a table, if I add some data here, then the formulas get added back automatically. So that means that you can set up a table as a template. In fact, I used this for the first time with a macro yesterday for a client where I deleted the body rows from the table. I only had to populate the data rows and didn't have to write code to refill the formulas. So that's a great benefit to the table feature, is that just because you delete all the data doesn't mean you delete the formulas. The formulas come back as you add that data. So lots of goodness around the table feature, but also some frustration. Because if you're in the first cell of a table, the insert and delete commands will be disabled. Similar, if you're trying to delete rows inside a pivot table, they'll be disabled in the same fashion. My biggest frustration about the table feature is that it disables the custom views feature. Custom views got a whole chapter in the book because there's so much we can automate with that. But we can't use custom views and tables together. There was a period of time in Excel for Mac that you could use tables and custom views in the same workbook. But that has gone away because the Mac version now uses the same code base as Windows, and so we can't use that. Now, if you have used custom views in a workbook and then you insert a table, your custom views simply go into a deep freeze. They're not deleted, you just can't access them until you remove the tables by going to a table, going to the design menu, choosing convert to range, and then say yes. So with regard, moving on from tables, another one of my favorite features that I feel gets overlooked in Excel is the watch window. The watch window, actually, I feel is kind of perfect for our modern surveillance society where there's cameras everywhere. Well, this lets you set up cameras inside your workbook. But not only are you watching cells, you're setting up bookmarks to those cells, and you can navigate to any cell in the workbook, any cell that you're watching, by double-clicking inside the watch window. So to implement the watch window, we go to Formulas, we click Watch Window. For most workbooks, that watch window is going to be empty. So you click Add Watch, choose the cell you wish to watch, click Add, and you can then add the watches as you go. And as you accumulate those watches, you can then monitor those cells. So if I went, let's say, to the Formulas menu, I clicked on Watch Window. So right now, this is empty. One way to speed things up a little bit is go ahead and click on the cell that you want to watch. Click Add Watch. So then it's pre-filled. Click Add. So I'm going to go watch a couple other cells here. I'll click Add. And we'll just do up through the first quarter. So I'm just simply going to cells, clicking Add Watch. And so I've got a few cells that I'm watching here. So information that I can glean just from the watch window, which workbook the cell is in, which worksheet. If I'm using names, if I've named the cells, I would see the names here, cell address, the value, and if there's a formula, I would see the formula. Sometimes what I'll do is shrink up the watch window, and depending on how it works, take the watch window, and if I put it near the edge, it will dock in near the side there. If I hide those columns I don't want to see, I do want to see the value, I don't need to see the cell, then I can create a little table of contents on the side here. Because if I double click on any of these, it's going to take me right to that worksheet cell. So not only is it a navigation aid, it's also a way to monitor those values. So if I went to March, let's say, and if I add 100,000 here to this number, press enter, then I can see the changes reflected on the other worksheets there. For the watch window, you can set up the watches, just close the dialog box. You can always open up the watch window at any point. So they just kind of hang out in the background, and it's a great navigation aid and monitoring tool there. To get rid of the watches, you can click on the first one, hold down the shift key, click on the last one, and clear all those watches out at once. This next feature, I wish Microsoft were being more democratic about enabling everyone to have access to this particular feature. There is an outstanding add-in. It's called the Inquire add-in. If you're using one of the apps for enterprise versions of Microsoft 365, or if you were using the business versions of the older versions of Excel. So here's how to tell if you have access to this particular tool. If we go to the File menu, if we go to Options, click on Add-ins. We're then going to change the add-in type to COM add-in. So you'll click on that drop-down list, choose COM add-ins, click Go. If Inquire shows up on your list of COM add-ins, if you click that and click OK, that will add an Inquire tab to your ribbon. That includes a comprehensive suite of auditing tools. So to show you that, if I were to go to the File menu, come down to Options, if I go to the Add-ins section here, yep. Go to Add-ins, a little delay there, and choose COM add-ins. Click Go. Notice that Inquire is available here, and so I click OK. Now, I think I turned that ribbon tab off for a class I was teaching, so I'm just going to turn it back on by customizing my ribbon there. So the Inquire menu, the components that it has are the workbook analysis tool creates an exhaustive report with just about every detail possible out of workbook. It, the last time I checked, creates an audit report of 47 worksheets that give you all kinds of information about the workbook that you're currently in. There's a workbook relationship command that lets you create a flow chart to see how that workbook is linked to other workbooks. Worksheet relationship, I don't find the flow charts as helpful, but the workbook analysis and compare files. Word has long had the ability for us to compare two different Word documents. The Inquire add-in lets us compare two different Excel worksheets. The clean excess cell formatting, clean excess formatting is also huge because what it lets us overcome are the past sins of Excel users, where whenever they want to format something, they format the entire column. When you click on a column just to change the number formatting, you're then formatting 1 million cells, as opposed to, say, selecting the 13 cells that really need to be formatted. And when folks are doing 1 million times over and over again in Excel workbooks, they get bloated, they become susceptible to data corruption. So one, try to actually just format just the actual cells that need something rather than the entire column. But if you encounter a workbook that others have not been that diligent, clean excess formatting will clean all that up. It's also a password manager for storing spreadsheet passwords. And so if it's available to you, it's a really great tool. This next command, I used Excel for far longer than I should have before I finally discovered that this particular circular reference command was tucked away under the error checking menu. So a circular reference is when you either, many times they happen accidentally, where users create a formula that references itself. And so it becomes this situation like a snake eating its tail, because it's just they're referencing each other. And then Excel tries up to 100 times to resolve the calculation, and it finally gives up. And then you open up the workbook and says this workbook has circular references. And if you don't know where to find the command, you can spend a lot of time trying to track down these circular references. But if we go to the error checking, if we go to the formulas tab, pull down the error checking dropdown. If circular references is lit up, it will then show you the cell address, or even if it's in another workbook, it'll tell you the workbook name and worksheet and then cell address. You click on it, you can then resolve that circular reference. In rare instances, have I needed to turn on enable iterative calculation to force Excel to resolve a circular reference? But do note that if this is turned on for a given workbook, then you cannot find the circular references. So there is a correlation between, so if enable circular references is enabled, you won't be able to use the circular references drop-down menu or the command there. One of my favorite functions in Excel is just the letter N. It's the N function. And it lets us make a note in the worksheet, in the actual worksheet cell. And there's multiple ways to make notes. We can add comments. We can add, there's 2 different styles of comments we can add. But what I like about the N function is, one, it doesn't leave any sort of indicator there. And I particularly like to use the N function if I'm going to rewrite a formula. I'll copy the original formula and throw it inside the N function. If you use the N function and enclose the contents inside double quotes, the N function returns a 0. So it doesn't add anything to your amount there, but it does allow you to store that old value. So just a quick example. I'll just do an even easier formula here. Let's say if I was going to do, equals A1 plus A2 plus A3. So a very cringy formula here. I do a lot of work teaching Excel to college students, and this is how that they write formulas, is they go and add these all together. So let's say that I wanted to keep that approach in place, but replace it with the sum function. I could start out and say N and put this old formula inside double quotes there, which would then cause it to return a 0. Then I can add my sum function in front of it or after it. Excel doesn't care. Just then plus the N function. And so now I have the better formula, but I also have an audit trail of what the formula used to look like. And you can put comments, you can put anything you want inside the N function there. A setting that, so let me back up. Many times we find ourselves double clicking on worksheet cells. There's actually 3 different outcomes that can happen when you double click on a worksheet cell. Normally, when you double click on a worksheet cell, you edit the contents. But if we go to the file menu and we go to options, we go to advanced, in the editing options section, so it's near the top, if we clear the checkbox for allow editing directly in cells and we click OK, there's 2 other things that can happen when we double click on a cell. If you double click on a cell that contains a formula, Excel will identify the precedents that are on the current worksheet. Now, it won't identify precedents that are on other worksheets, but it will identify precedents on the current worksheet. Or if you double click on a cell that has a note, that the old, the classic comments, when you double click, it allows you to edit that comment. So just a quick run through on that. So for instance here, if I were to double click on cell B4, looks like my settings turned off. So let me go turn my setting on. So under advanced, let's just start from the beginning. So normally what we'd expect, double click, you're entering this, editing the cell. The 2 other behaviors though, if we go to the file menu, if we go to options, under the advanced section, right, it's 1, 2, 3, 4th choice down, allow editing directly in cells, clear that checkbox. Now, typically I'll turn this off situationally. Usually I want to be able to double click to edit cells. But if I want to be able to edit this comment, if I double click, it put me right in there to be able to edit that comment, as opposed to having to right click and then say edit note, and then I finally get in there. There's many things in Excel that I term death by 1,000 cuts, where these little actions such as right clicking and then editing and then eventually getting what we want, all those take a toll. And so anywhere we can shave things off, that has an impact on our day. Now I'm going to delete this note here, and then I'm going to double click on the cell. since the cell contains a formula, and just to show you the formula that it contains, actually, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do formula text. So that's, since the cell contains that formula, if I double click, it highlights the precedent cells, which then means that I can tab my way through them. So that's additional functionality that gets unlocked simply by disabling the allow editing directly in cells setting there. So that's one that you can then use kind of strategically when the need arises. Another death by 1,000 cuts experience can arise when we try to edit things in a reference edit field, or often referred to as ref edit fields. So inside an Excel dialog box, when you are trying to make an edit, if you tap the arrow keys, you can run afoul of enter mode versus edit mode. So let's say that I wanted to edit the contents for this chart. Or, if I wanted to add, let's say I add April here, and then I realize that April doesn't show up. The easiest way to resize my chart is just click on the chart, grab the handle, and pull it over. But I'm going to do it the more difficult way so that we can talk about the edit mode. So I'll go to chart design. I'm going to click on select data. And here in the first cell, so where I want to draw your attention is the bottom left corner of my screen where it says point mode. So when I go to when I pull up a dialog box that is referencing the worksheet, it points to the data. There's that green border. When I click in that cell, the green border goes away, but notice it now says enter. And let's say I wanted to change that D there to an E. When I tap the arrow key, what happens is I start entering cell references. So, and often we get frustrated and throw our hands up and, try to start over again. Instead, when you're in these fields, if you press the F2 key, you can get to edit mode. Edit mode allows you to navigate in there and then change that. Now, once in a while, the formula bar, normally the formula bar always operates in edit mode. Sometimes it will put itself into enter mode. So if you find you're in the formula bar, you're editing a formula and the arrow keys aren't working, look down and you might need to press the F2 key to get it back into edit mode, and then you can use the arrow keys. So I want to talk about date diff for a couple of reasons. One, because it's always been kind of a stepchild function because it hasn't always been documented in help files. It is documented in help files, but now Microsoft is taking date diff in another direction where when we start, it's not going to show up in the formula on the list of formulas when we start typing the function. If you're not familiar with date diff, it allows you to calculate the number of days or units between two different dates. So if we have a start date and an end date, we can specify that we can calculate the number of years between two dates, months, or days, or we can also ignore the months and years and so on. But let me show you how date diff works in the present. Actually, we'll see if it happens on this computer. So a change that Microsoft has made is when you start typing date diff used to show up on this list. It no longer shows up. Now, if you know about date diff and type the parenthesis, then it will begrudgingly at this point say, okay, you can use date diff. I am a valid function, but it doesn't show you the arguments. So you can click on the function name to get the help screen to enable that. But here's what I think that they're doing. So date diff was originally added to Excel for compatibility with Lotus 123. But for whatever reason, the Excel team never really bought into date diff being a valid function, but they kind of kept it in, and now it's there for compatibility reasons. Well, here's this thing where it's there if you know it, kind of like if you go to a restaurant and you can order certain things off the menu. They're kind of taking this off menu approach, and I suspect that they might start doing that in the future with functions like concatenate, where they've tagged it as a legacy function. Now, they would break countless spreadsheets if they took concatenate out of the lineup. But what I think we'll start seeing is some of these legacy functions won't show up on the list. At some point, I would expect that we start typing concat, we'll only see the concat choice. We won't see concatenate. If we know about concatenate, we'll be able to type it out and use it. But that, I think, is a harbinger of where Microsoft is going to be handling kind of some of these older functions there. All right, so I want to then just kind of run through, we've seen a few quick access toolbar shortcuts, and I just want to share a few more with you before I wrap up the formal part of the presentation. A task that can be mind-numbingly tedious is unprotecting cells that you want when you want to protect a workbook. But there's a way to create a keyboard shortcut for that. So first, let me go and make sure that all the cells are locked here. So, because by default, in a worksheet, every cell is marked as locked unless you unlock it. And so let's say I want the user to be able to change these 3 cells. So I'll change the color on them just so that we can keep track of them. And maybe I want them to change the date as well. The way that I typically lock the cells or unlock cells, depends how much I have to do. If it's just something quick, I'll go to the Format Cells dialog box, I'll go to the Protection tab, I'll clear locked, and then I'll click OK. But if I'm having to do that over and over again, that gets rather tedious. But I like that approach because I like the certainty of knowing that if the checkbox is cleared, that cell is unlocked. Now, on the Format menu, there is a lock cell command that you can use to unlock cells. And it has, notice there's a little background here because right now this cell is locked. Now, if I were to click on this command, it does indeed unlock the cell. And if I went back to the menu, there's no shading there, meaning that cell is unlocked. But things I don't like about that is that the menu vanishes. And part of what we fight with spreadsheets is the blur. If I'm going to, dozens of cells and unlocking them, we lose track of what cells did we lock or unlock. And so what I do like this command to use this command for is rather than left clicking, is I right click on it and add it to the quick access toolbar. Because then that gives me an icon here so that for most cells, there will be shading behind that icon there. So for instance, if I select these cells and I click it, well, I've unlocked those cells. Now, as I navigate through the workbook, then I can tell if I go down to cell B4, the shading appears, so that cell is locked. If I wanted to unlock it, I can tap the Alt key, do 7, so I now have a keyboard shortcut for unlocking that cell. Or if I want to lock it back, Alt 7 would lock it back. And so that's how we can create a keyboard shortcut for protecting or unprotecting cells. The next thing I want to talk about is this approach that Microsoft has kind of foisted on us with regard to full screen view. Up through Excel 2010, there was a full screen command on the view menu. And what I liked about it was that when you clicked full screen, it would hide all the screen elements and you would just see the worksheet grid. And then to get out of it, you just press the escape key. Microsoft's intention is that if we want to hide the ribbon, we'll click this ribbon selection button, the ribbon options button, ribbon display options, choose auto hide ribbon. When you do auto hide the ribbon, let me show you my frustration with that. So if I go and click the ribbon display options button, and depending on what version of Microsoft 365 you have, that command either shows up near the top right corner, or once the undo commands move down in the home tab, instead you'll click an arrow over here. Now, right now, my button says collapse the ribbon, and that collapses ribbon here, and to expand the ribbon, I can double click on any command and that will expand it back. But they've changed, so the ribbon display options button moves down to this corner here and then gives you the menu. In fact, we see it right here. Step 5 shows you how they've changed it. So the old style auto hide ribbon, that shows up at the top. And then you have to go back to get out of that mode. You have to go back and click that button again. Or you can click the arrow, choose full screen mode. Either way, Excel will show you the formula bar. But to get out of that, you have to go up and click the dots and then click the always show ribbon. And so you can't just pop in and out of full screen view. So if I chose here to say auto hide ribbon, that hides the ribbon. When I click here, it then obscures the first row or a couple rows of the worksheet, which is frustrating if I'm trying to do any work on those rows and see the menu at the same time. And I physically have to go up, expand this, click ribbon options, show tabs and commands, and it's just a multi-step process. But if we go into that treasure chest, the commands not in the ribbon, there is a full screen command. And again, another quirk here, it shows up in one of two places. It's either going to show up in the listing under full screen, or it might show up under toggle full screen. Wherever you find it, if you add it to your quick access toolbar, gives you an icon that you can either click or use a keyboard shortcut, and it's going to hide everything, including the formula bar. To get out of full screen view, you just press the escape key. So to add that to our quick access toolbar, we click the arrow, we go down to more commands, choosing here commands not in the ribbon. To navigate this list more effectively, you can type a letter. So I'm going to type the letter G, because that takes me to the bottom, the start of the G's, but also the bottom of the F's. In this version, full screen shows up here, so I'll click add. Now, if it did not show up here, I would then type the letter U, and that would take me down to the bottom of the T's, and I would see toggle full screen roughly in this section here. So it is there in every version of Excel, it just could be in two different places. But I click OK. When I use full screen or toggle full screen, it hides the entire worksheet there, and press escape. So in fact, just to give you a frame of reference, on this computer, if I have the ribbon displayed, I can see like 24.5 rows. If I use auto hide ribbon, I can see 32.5 rows. But if I use full screen or toggle full screen, I get to see 35 rows. So maximum space, but even better, press escape, I'm out of that mode, and then I'm back and forth. So this gives me a keyboard shortcut for maximizing the worksheet when I don't need the menu. As soon as I need the menu, it's just an escape key away, and then I can toggle back and forth between that. Back in the day, meaning back in Excel 2003 and earlier, if you held down the shift key when you click on the file menu, the close command would change to close all. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in the modern versions of Excel, but close all does exist in the commands not in the ribbon. And the reason I bring that up is, one, it's an easy way to clear the decks on all the open spreadsheets. But the other thing is I do always have a contentious relationship with this X in the corner here, because if I forget and only have one worksheet open, one workbook open, and I click close, not only does it close the workbook, it also closes Excel. So that's where I've trained myself to press Control W when I want to close a workbook, so that I, at the end, once I eventually closed all of the workbooks that I have open here, then Excel is still open. The close all command would do the same thing. It would close all the open workbooks. It'd ask you if you want to save them, but get you down to an Excel window that doesn't have any files open. With regard to the quick access toolbar, any commands you want to remove, you try them out and don't like them, just right click and then say remove from quick access toolbar. A command that often gets a lot of great feedback when I include it in my webinars is the text-to-speech command. That's also in the commands not in the ribbon. And what this allows you to do is to have Excel speak the contents of the worksheet cells to you. And what I like about that is when there's these unavoidable situations where I have information on the screen, there's information on a piece of paper or another screen, and I want someone to read it out loud, I can have Excel read it out loud. So you would add speak cells. You would also add the stop speaking cells to turn it off. And you simply select a range of cells and click the speak cells button that reads the text aloud to you. And then you can click stop speaking cells if needed. So I'm right at about the end of the hour. So the last thing that I want to share with you, if you like keyboard shortcuts, or if you want to be able to show anyone an easy way to find keyboard shortcuts in Excel, if we go to the File menu and we choose New, in the search box, type in the word shortcuts and press Enter. There's two different Excel workbooks or templates that you can double click on. There's one for Excel for Windows, one for Excel for Mac, that give you 50 keyboard shortcuts. So if we go to the File menu and we choose New, so rather than choosing at the top here, search for online templates. I'm going to put in the word shortcuts, press Enter. And we see two of them are listed. The one on the left is for Windows. The one on the right is for the Mac. So we double click. Instant keyboard shortcut tip there. And so that's always a handy one. If you see someone that expresses interest in keyboard shortcuts, is the easy way for them to have a ready-made list of shortcuts. All right, well, I am happy to stick around and answer questions. It looks like I was trying not to get distracted by the chat window, so we'll take a quick spin through the chat window there and see what folks have had to say. We are going to have a drawing. Taya is going to send me a file.
I have sent it to you, David. It should be in your chat already.
Let's see.
Let me know if you can see it.
There it is. All right, well, we are actually going to use Excel to pick our winner here.
We do have a few more people on that list. So we may need to, if you pick somebody who's not here, we may just run it once again, but that should be okay.
Okay.
Boy,
All right. Zoom is not letting me save that file for some reason. Wait, maybe it is. Yes, I want to save it in the documents. Okay, I think I'm good.
Good stuff.
Let's see. All right, let me try this again. There we go. All right. So here's how we're going to do our drawing. We're going to let Excel decide. So we're going to use the ran between function. And we'll do number between 1 and 1,000. We'll assign that to everyone and paste that. And we'll just pick the top two. So drum roll. They aren't really names. Should we pick the first two real names, or what do you think, Alan?
You can go for the first two.
Should we take
both
the
here.
top two or the two real names?
No, they're both here. Those top two names are here.
Okay. Well,
That's
if the
okay.
top two are here, if you'll put your name in the chat box there. And we'll give folks a moment to do that. I want to look through the chat.
Green, yeah.
Claire asked a question that I fully anticipated seeing, and Claire's question is, how is he making the formulas appear in the comment there? That is the question that I get asked all the time. And again, that function that I used a moment ago was ran between, where I said between 1 and 1,000. And so I wrote some code that lets me take the formula and put it into a cell comment. And I did that as a teaching aid. I have been asked about that so many times that I did create a web page that won't show exactly how to create my formatted version, but it will show you the code that you can copy and paste to create a similar version. Also talks about using the formula text function. So formula text is a code-free way of displaying formulas. But it does get tedious writing formula text out over and over again. And so that is the other approach. So let's see. Back at the top. Okay, so Kunj has a question. What happens when you need to change a formula? Do you have to override it in row 2, apply it all the way down? So with regard to the table feature, I did go through that kind of quick because I wanted to basically lay my hands on a bunch of different quirks and nuances so that there was a lot of ground to cover. So if I make this into a table, and the question is what happens with the calculated columns here. So we're going to do per case price. And we'll just use the built-in references there. So one of my favorite parts about the table feature is that I could be anywhere in this column. And if I change the formula, it updates the entire column. Now, here's the catch. There is an autocorrect options that shows up here. And if you don't want it to update the entire column, you can choose undo calculated column. And then that would mean that change that I made would only affect that one cell. Now, the risk that we run here is, let's say I come back in here and change this cell. You can accidentally click the next option, which is stop automatically creating calculated columns. If you choose that, that is global. That's not just for this workbook. So if I choose this, then now, whenever I make a change to a formula, it's no longer updating the entire column. And I also can't get to my autocorrect option there. Now, it does give me a little icon here that lets me choose to overwrite the cells, but I have to keep doing that over and over again. To get the automated part back, I have to go to the File menu, go to Options, and in the proofing section, so this is one we have to really dig for. We have to go to proofing, we go to autocorrect options, we then go to auto format as we type, and then we click fill down formula. So if you turn that setting off accidentally, that's the levels you have to go through. You have to go to the options dialog box, proofing, autocorrect options, auto format as you type, click that checkbox, and then click OK. And then at that point, then the automatic behavior is returned there. So definitely a nuanced feature there, and I'm glad that you asked that question. let's see. Lee said they have never noticed the watch window. I'm still, the other day I'm watching a Mr. Excel video and I never noticed that on the outline command, there was a little button there that lets you change settings about the outlines. And so it's just remarkable how, even after decades of Excel, you can still learn new things. And part of that, we just get tunnel vision of,
Hi, Coach.
we've done it.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Scrolling down through that chat box. Patrick says, inquire is good for basic checking, but comparing is poor. Let's see. Doug says, is inquire available all Excel 365? That's in the enterprise version. So if I go to the file menu, if I go to account, your Microsoft 365 has to say apps for enterprise. If it says apps for enterprise, then you get the inquire add-in. If it just says like home and family, then that's not available to the home and family users, unfortunately. And inquire is available in some of the older versions, like if you have Excel 2019, if you had the business version. So let's see. It's got an Excel machine. That's great. Thank you. Let's see. What do you do when you try to copy and paste from one worksheet but cannot paste? An error box says the data is not the same size. Typically, that's one of those quirky things, those quirky errors that come up in Excel. I mean, usually you should be able to like copy this section and then, paste it here. Sometimes if you have selected a different size, then it might trigger it. I know that error prompt that you've run into, and can't think of my, off the top of my head, a way to trigger that.
I was thinking they might have clicked the arrow in the top left. Do you know what I mean? The one that's what I was thinking from the question.
Yes, sometimes. So, okay, so one situation that can arise, let's say that you did click here and you click the entire worksheet, and then you come over to a different workbook, and instead of starting in column A, you start in column B, and then you try to paste because I've selected the entire worksheet before. So this is a better prompt. I haven't seen this prompt before, to copy all the cells, make sure you put them in the first cell. Typically what I was expecting was to see that it would, so let me try this a different way. I'm going to do all the way down the bottom. Let's see. So I've got almost the whole worksheet. I'm going to try pasting it. I'm going to paste it on row 10. And so that's the error that can happen. So probably what's happening is, all right, so here's something that comes to mind. Let's say you copy, when you select the entire column rather than just the cells that you want, but then you're not pasting it in row 1, you're trying to put it in row 10. That's definitely a situation where that can arise. So you should typically be able to avoid it if you, like in the case of a table, if you press Control A, if you're in the heading row and press Control A, that will select the entire table. Now, the nuance is, let's say you have a total row as well. If you're in the body of the table and you press Control A, you press Control C, and then you go to paste, well, the heading row and the total row don't get copied. Control A will select the entire table when your cursor's in the first row or the total row. If it's in the body, then it only selects the body. But that would be a way to copy the entire table. And since I started out from the heading row, now here's it included the headings, the header row and the other row as well. So let's see. All right, so back to our drawing. Anna Karen. And let's see.
I'll pop details and I've messaged you in the chat, David.
Okay. Okay, great. So we got our other name as well. All right, so we do have our two winners. So Anna Karen, if you will message one of the organizers with your address and let me know if you want the print book or the ebook. I'm happy to get either one of those to you.
Awesome.
Let's see, does your book everything anchoring table cells and formulas? Yes, I do talk, there's a whole chapter on the table feature and I definitely talk about formulas as well. Alan's goes in fact, great thing about Alan's book, when I first picked it up and flipped through it, that chapter on tables is titled, You Need to Start Using Tables. So definitely Alan. So Alan had many more pages. Alan's book has, 815 pages at least. And so Alan had a lot more room to go a lot deeper. My publisher wasn't as, they did give me a lot more pages than they originally planned. And so I did squeeze a lot more content in than I planned originally. So let's see. So AJ says that they thought that they had to go use visible cells only for filtering. That's the nuance, is that when you use the filter feature, the hidden cells are protected. When you use any of the outline commands, the hidden cells are not protected. And so that's where the new trick I've stumbled across recently was layer the filter on over the outline, and then that protects those cells as well. So Doug has the Excel 365 Business Edition, but it doesn't show up in the comment end. I don't know how, Doug, how you would get it into that version. The one thing that I would recommend that you do is go to account and check for updates, because if you have that apps for enterprise version, it should show up. Alan, do you have any insight into why the inquire add-in might not show up?
I don't know. I don't know if it's available in all 365 or not. I think it's only available in certain levels, I think. But I'm not 100%. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, guys. I appreciate you letting me know that.
Sure.
Cheers, Dave.
So Oliver has a question that I haven't delved with yet of importing data from Excel Online to Access. So I just haven't, I've dabbled a little bit with Excel Online, but that is not a question I have the answer to.
The Access one.
So the ebook is also available from my publisher, which is Packed, and I can look for that. All right, well, I've gotten through the chat panel. So Alan, I think we can, if we want to open up the floor to just any general discussion or any questions or comments.
Yes, just going to pop something in there. Did you share a link, Don't know. I can't.
I'm looking for the link on the.
Oh, you're doing it on there. I wasn't even watching. I went to Pact quickly myself to grab one, but I didn't.
Pact Hub is where we have to go.
Yeah, I did share one of those links earlier in the chat, but I'm not sure how good it is. People can validate if the link I shared works. Is it off an ebook? Oh, yes, they do, yeah.
Let's see.
I do have a quick question. I didn't quite get, you had said that you wrote up something about your simple macro for the comments of the formulas.
Yes.
Where was that? Where can we find that?
I'll put it in the chat box again. So it's in the chat box.
All right, thank you very much.
Is there?
And great presentation, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to close down the YouTube stream, everybody. So we'll still be here. I'm just shutting down the YouTube bit.
So much material there. Thanks, David.